Okay, so we're going to go ahead. We're talking about listings today. Mitz is just sending you the papers for today, the booklet for today.
So this is what we do the appointment.
Yeah, so how we're going to talk about it. Yeah. Okay. We're sending you something called Our Unique Plan for Marketing Your Property. And that's what we're going to talk about today is how to market, what to do on a listing appointment. And first of all, let's try to make this, if we can, an interactive class. The only person here today is Noi. So if we can all share and talk together, that would be wonderful. Is that okay? Can you? Okay, Gabrielle, I saw your phone was just unmuted and Debbie, yours too. So,
Yes.
okay, all right, let's talk about why listings are so important and the necessity of having listings. In this business, we either work with buyers or with sellers. Sellers like to sell something, they've got something, they're ready to do something else. The reason for selling is most people need help. If you have a listing, to me, you're in control. You've got what everybody else wants, and that's a buyer's looking, and especially in the market we've had for, I'm going to say the last 10 years or so, maybe more, we had more buyers than sellers. And so every listing usually has multiple offers on it, and that's a good place for a seller to be in. It's a good place for a listing agent to be in because you aren't going to sit with your listing on the market for a long time. I came out of a market where there were usually more listings than buyers, and a lot of times those listings will sit around for 6 months, a year, year and a half, 2 years even, waiting for a buyer to come along because there's not enough competition. So especially over here where we've got a lot of buyers, it's really good to have a listing. If you've got a listing, you're just about guaranteed money in the bank. And it's important to list properties the right way. It's important to be a good listing agent. It's important to know what you need to accomplish in a listing and the expectations of that seller and how you can best serve that seller. So when you have a listing appointment, I think there's two ways to approach it. If it's somebody that you know or somebody that's been referred to you, I think you're going to have an easier time generally with that listing because there's a level of built-in trust. If, let's say you're on the floor waiting for a floor call or at an open house and somebody calls you or comes into the open house and says they want to list, they're interested or they wouldn't have approached you. But now you've got to sell yourself and everything that you can do for them in order to get that listing. And a lot of times there's competition to get listings. You have to be able to stand out when a seller is interviewing multiple agents to list a property. And that's pretty common where a seller will call up multiple agents and bring them to their home and interview them, see how they're going to handle the listing, what they have to offer, so on and so forth. So it's important to know how to service a listing and how to market a property. So often agents think that a listing is merely getting somebody to sign a listing agreement, putting a lockbox on the door, putting a sign in the front yard, and putting it in the multiple listing service and waiting for a buyer to come along, that's all they have to do. And unfortunately, that's all a lot of agents do. They aren't really marketing. They aren't really representing that seller. They put the sign out, got it in the MLS, Now they're waiting to pick up a commission check at the close of escrow. And there's a whole big space in between there that a seller really needs good representation. Even if you have a listing that you get an offer on within a day or two, you've got to convince that seller before he ever signs on the listing agreement that you're competent, that your company is competent, that you can handle the situation. You've got to prove yourself, gain their trust and their respect for you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. There are basically two approaches to a listing presentation. One of them is, well, it's either a one appointment process or a two appointment process. I like to teach the two appointment process, and I think you'll see the reasons why. Although I'm going to tell you, most people will do the one-step process for a number of reasons, but the very highest echelon of listing agents in the country will do a two-step process. And so there's a reason for teaching that. A listing appointment in two steps should, the first appointment should be a process of gathering information. That's your reconnaissance mission, to go to the house, meet the person, create some trust and rapport, look at the property so that you can go back then to the office and do a thorough job of investigating past sales that compare to that property and current properties on the market, because that's their competition. Agents do that in one shot if they have experience and they have a good feel for the market. But if you aren't doing a lot of listings, and until you feel very confident in being able to go into somebody's house and know exactly where that house should be listed, the price, I'm going to suggest that you make two trips. First trip is a reconnaissance. You're finding out about that property. You can't really look at the MLS and know what you're comparing to unless you've been in the house and you've seen what you're comparing to, okay? Because the way most houses are today, they're either brand new and look really good, or they're older and maybe they've been maintained, maybe they haven't been maintained, maybe they're very dated but in perfect condition, or maybe they're very dated and they've been abused. There's going to be a difference in price, but it's good to know what people are looking for. Most people, and not everybody, but most people are looking for updated kitchens and bathrooms, current colors, so on and so forth, okay? That's what you want to look at. You want to be able to look at the house when you go the first time and see the conditions, see what the amenities are, get some idea of what needs to be done to that house, if anything. Go back and then compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. Comparing a house to something that isn't even like that house and trying to come up with a price is not only going to be frustrating, but you could have some legal liability if you misjudge the value of a house and put it on the market at the wrong price. Both ways, high or low. If you put a property on the house that is too low and it sells very quickly, and that seller says something's wrong here, and then that seller finds out that you put that property on low and it sold very quickly, he could take you to court and say, I want the difference in what it should have sold for and what it did sell for. Okay. The other way is that if you price it too high and that property sits on the market for a long time, especially in a market that's changing, perhaps it's a descending market, not an accelerating ascending market, you put it on the market and it sits there too long at a higher price and the value is going down consistently, that seller can say, this agent didn't put it on, didn't judge the comparative value of my house in the right way, put it on the market too high. Now, 8 months later, I've sold it for so many thousands of dollars under where it should have sold had it been put on the market at the right place 8 months ago. And he can say to the judge, Your Honor, I feel like I've lost $50,000 here. That's how much the market's come down. He gives supporting evidence to that, and the judge may agree with him and say, that's right, this agent did a poor job. Agent, you need to pay this person $50,000 or whatever. So it's very important to know what you're comparing and how you're comparing when you see the house for the first time and you make your notes. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about going to a stranger's house for the first time, somebody that you haven't met. You want to be prepared. What do you want to take with you on that first trip? Certainly you want to take some knowledge. Even if you don't know what the inside of the house looks like, you can look at the comps for the neighborhood for what's sold in the past 3 to 6 months within a quarter of a mile or a half mile out from that house. See what the comps look like. See what it said in the marketing remarks about those properties so that you've got an idea, not exactly what that house should be listed at, but what others have been listed for and sold, because the sold properties will be what an appraiser looks at to come up with a value when an appraiser appraises a property for a new loan. So he's going to look at the past sales within the last 6 months or so. And if it's a rapidly changing market, it may be as little as 3 months. So you want to have some idea of what's going on in the neighborhood around in our local market and even in the national market. What's happening in the world today? What's affecting values? What's driving sales? So on and so forth. Okay, so it takes some homework to do. And we've talked a little bit about this before. The best way to begin to know the local market is to get into the MLS every day, look at the hot sheet to see what the new listings are, what they're on the market for, where they are, square footage, age, so on and so forth. And then look at the sold properties that have sold within the last 24 hours. And that's going to be very good education for you and a very easy way to gather facts, gather information, and learn from that. And then if you go out and explore listings, I think every new agent, as soon as you get your lockbox key, you should go out and begin exploring what's on the market. We have a lot of vacant houses around, whether it's our listing or another company's listing. Go out, go into those vacant houses, leave your card, but look around, because that's going to give you a feel for square footage, for neighborhoods, different builders. This area is very conscious of who the builders are, and not only the builders, but the floor plans and the models that they have. So you're going to hear that a lot in this area. To me, that's very interesting. I've never encountered that before here, but everybody knows. Jerry, name me a builder. Wathan Castanos. Do you know any of their models or?
They actually, the biggest model they make is two masters, one on each end of the house. It's like 3,500 square feet.
Oh, okay.
Really nice houses. I don't know if they're still doing that floor plan or not. Some years.
Yeah.
my son lives in a lot of this house.
Uh-huh.
There's one Dusty has one listed in Harlan County.
Oh, yes. Okay. So Wathen Castanos is a name that you hear quite often,
Yeah, they're a
and
really good builder.
Yeah.
They're nice homes.
okay. So there's a number of builders around, and they all have
What's up, Terry?
varying degrees of success and reputation, so on and so forth. Okay. So when you get to the house that you're going to be meeting the seller for,
Yeah, it's,
you want to have a notepad so you can take notes and some idea of what you're going to be talking to that seller about. And you're going to knock on the door, and you want to be right on time. When you have an appointment, if your appointment is at 10 o'clock, you want to be there at 10 o'clock, not a minute before and a minute after. Ring the doorbell at 10 o'clock and have your card ready to present to that seller. Introduce yourself. I'm Marsha Richardson. I'm here for our appointment that we set up this morning for your 10 o'clock because you're interested in selling your home. And they should invite you in and hand them to your card. And when you go in, where's the best place to sit, do you think?
Table?
At the table?
Kitchen table.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's the best place. Why, Gabriella?
Because, well, some of them are round. It's just easier to see. Maybe they're more comfortable there. It's where the family dinners are.
It's the heart of the home, and that's where the
Take
decision
notes.
is made, and everybody feels the most comfortable at a table. So if at all possible, and if they should ask you, or even if they head toward the living room, you might just say, would you mind if we sat at your kitchen table? Most people don't mind. They're going to be much less formal and more apt to give you good information sitting at the kitchen table. So how are you going to arrange the seating when you're at that table? What's the best thing? If you've got two people that you're meeting with, how do you want them to sit? Where do you want to sit?
Would you want them to sit on one side of the table and you sit on the other side so you could see them both at the same time?
Yes, absolutely, Debbie. You're totally correct, because if you are looking in one direction and then the other direction because they're on opposite sides of the table, you miss a lot of the body language and the little innuendos that people make. If you can look at both of them and they can look at you, it's much better. Okay, so you're at the kitchen table and they're sitting on one side, you're on the other side. You've had a chance to do a little chit chat first, which is very important to kind of break the ice and build some rapport. What is rapport? Why is that important?
It gets them to trust you.
Yes, absolutely. It's building trust. It's giving you a chance to show that you're interested in them. It's asking them questions about themselves. It's making comments that are positive about their home. So when you first walk in, you want to be able to find something very quickly to make a positive comment about. Sometimes that can be difficult. Maybe there's nothing to be real positive about. So you can talk about the nice drive on the way out or the weather or something. But oftentimes when you walk into somebody's house, you're going to see things like photographs or trophies or something like that that gives an indication, something about that family. And if they have children, and you see trophies, that's a really good thing to talk about. I see you've got a little softball player. And people always like to tell you about their children, their pets, their whatever. So find some common ground that way, have an opportunity to chat with them, break the ice a little bit, get them to feel comfortable. They may have a question or two for you, but it really I don't think it's a time when you want to spend a lot of time talking about yourself or your accolades. Uh, it's there to get information about them. We're going to talk about some things to do ahead of the listing in a little while. And if you have given them any information ahead of time, they will be familiar with you anyway, because you're going to have some information in the little information kit that you give to them ahead of time. But um,
Marsha, would you give them a listing agreement too at this time?
yes, we'll talk about that. Well, let's go ahead and talk about the prelude book. I call it a prelude book. A lot of times, if you know ahead of time that you're going to have a listing, let's say a day or two ahead of time, you can do a little book or a notebook or a couple of sheets of paper, however you want to put it together, and give them some information. And that information may include a little biography of you. I have a biography for one of our agents that I did in the past. And I think when you have information to give to sellers, to have a bio sheet on yourself, everybody likes to know a little bit about you. People are curious animals, and they like to know a little bit about who they're talking to. They don't want to know the details of your high school prom, but they would like to know that maybe where you're from, whatever. So I will have some examples of a bio sheet. You can create your own, but in your little book, if you're going to give something out to somebody, I would say that if you have a little introductory message, thanking them for the opportunity to get together with them, and a little information about our company. And I think it's really important to know some things about our company. We're the oldest residential real estate company in Fresno. There are commercial companies, or at least one that's been around longer than we have, but we've been here for 60 years. And the only way a company can maintain an important standing in a community for 60 years is to do a good job. A lot of our business is repeat and referral business, and we are doing business now with second and third generations of people that have come here and then later brought their children and then their grandchildren to buy property here. To me, that says a lot about the integrity of this company and the satisfaction that the clients have felt in working with us. So we've got an information sheet on the company. And then I think something about the divisions of the company that we have, because we actually, in addition to doing resales, we have fine home and estates. Century 21 companies have to qualify for fine home and estates in order to use the signage and the cards, stationery, so on and so forth, for fine home and estates. We qualified many years ago. We used to have to qualify every year or two. Now they've made it permanent, and you've got the opportunity. You don't even have to take a class in fine home and estates, but in our area, it's for properties that sell. I think our qualifying range was at about 500 and some thousand, excuse me. In other areas, it's going to be where the top 10% of the prices in your locale sell. And so if you're in an area where the upper end homes sell at between, let's say, 5 and 8 million, that would be the price range that we would have to have so many homes in. In this area, our high end started at about 500, and so that's where we are. And doing some classes on selling high-end homes, I highly recommend. It's a different way of doing business sometimes, and sellers have some different expectations than sellers that aren't in a high-end home. So do a little research on that. It may be a market that you're very interested in. We also have agricultural properties. We have an agricultural division. We have a number of agents here that have been farmers in the past. They have ag land, dairy cattle, so on and so forth. So we have an agricultural division. We've got a commercial division. We have a number of agents that deal in business opportunities, development land, any residential property that has more than 5 units is considered a residential commercial property. So we have a lot of people that deal in those, and I think sellers like to know that we have the ability to delve into just about any kind of a real estate arena. We also have, of course, C. Watson Financial. I think it's important to let our sellers know that we can help buyers get financing right in our office, and it's a convenience that helps the seller get a property sold if it's easier for a buyer to get a loan. So some of those benefits that we have. Then something else that I have is the meaning of an independent contractor and understanding commissions. We talked a little bit the other day about interviewing buyers and talking to buyers and getting them ready for that buying process, asking them some questions. It's sort of the same thing with sellers. We want to interview them. We're going to have an interview in a few minutes, but a lot of times people, because they don't buy and sell properties very often, don't understand that we're independent contractors and we're not salaried. We're only commissioned. We only earn a commission when the escrow closes and they get their keys. If they don't get their keys, that escrow hasn't closed and we haven't earned a commission. There's nobody out there putting gas in our cars or paying our kids' college tuition or anything else. We have to earn those commissions. So if they understand the way you work and you're asking for their allegiance and their loyalty, they'll understand why you're asking for it then. Okay, and then I think it's really important, I've got a page here on getting your house ready to market. That seller, if they have a chance to read some of this information before your appointment, it's going to prompt some questions. It's going to give them some things to think about and what they may do, because people, and we all fall into this category, become very comfortable with our surroundings, and we fail to see things in our own homes that people that walk in for the first time spot right away. This is the way everybody is. This is the way every house is. We get used to living with things, and we kind of need to step back and take a look at our houses through fresh eyes. How is a buyer going to see this house when they step inside, when they pull up to the curb? What's the curb appeal? So getting their house ready to go on the market gives them some pointers. And then there are several pages here on staging tips, very simple staging tips that will help a seller stage their own house. There are professional stagers available. They may charge anywhere from $500 to a few $1,000s to stage a home. Is it necessary? It can be. It depends on that house. So I think you as an agent will develop your own thoughts and feelings about staging and about giving advice to sellers on what they need to do to get their house show worthy from the curb through the back door. Okay? And then the very last page is a checklist for the property owner These are some of the things that a property owner is going to need, and I want to read these to you because they're things that even we as agents don't think about all the time. So this is a good checklist for us too. We want a list of all the people on title, a copy of the last mortgage statement indicating approximate balance, and how many loans are there on the property. Sometimes years ago, people had home equity loans that they put on. A lot of times when they first got their loan, it was a way of not coming in with any down payment back a number of years ago. They maybe paid off those home equity loans, but they're still open loans unless they were canceled. So it's important to remind them, did you have a home equity loan at one time? And if they did, there's a good chance that it's still in effect an open loan, even though they may not owe any money on it, okay? Child support judgments, those are going to show on the preliminary title report. Are there any loan payments overdue? If they haven't made a payment on their house, it's very important for you to know how many months they've gone without making a payment. Because if they've gone more than 90 days without making a payment, they're going to get a notice of default filed against that property by the lender, and that puts them in a foreclosure situation where they're going to have to cure those back payments, bring it current, or they could stand to lose that property on the courthouse steps if they can't bring it current. So very important for you to know. Are there any co-signers on the loans for that property? Are there any solar leases or purchase plans? Any PACE or HERO loans for home improvements on properties? A lot of times people are approached to put in new windows or solar or some other kind of home improvement, and the salesman knocking on their door to do these improvements say, we can put it on your property taxes and you just pay it through your property taxes. That sounds like a good way to do things, except that it will almost always make problems for that homeowner then. So it's important for you to know if there is a PACE or a HERO loan. Are the property taxes paid current? Is the property in a trust? So you're going to need the name of the trust, the date or revision date of the trust, and you don't need a copy of it, but escrow will need a copy of the trust. Is the property in probate? If the owner of the property passed away and the property was not in a trust, then there's going to have to be a probate if all of the original people have passed away. And so somebody's going to be in charge of that, either an executor or an administrator of the estate with an attorney involved. So that's important information for you to know too. Before you go to the listing, when you're doing your initial research, you're going to pull up a property profile or a tax sheet. It's going to show you who's on title. And if the person you meet at the home is not the name of the person that showed up on the tax list as being on title, then you need to have a discussion about what their relationship is to this sale and to the seller. And is the seller deceased, incapacitated, so on and so forth. And has the person been designated a power of attorney for a person on title? If so, the power of attorney document will be needed and must be notarized and recorded. And copies of any inspections completed, such as a pest, roof, well, etc. So if that seller's already done some preparatory inspections, talk about those, see what they have done or haven't done. Do you have pets on the property site? That's important to know because some are inside, some are outside, some are in and out. Pets are very important in the sale, and it's good to know if there are pets and how they're going to be handled during showings. There was an agent here in this area, not in our company, thank goodness, some other company, for a while, who, when she got a listing, she would tell the people if they had pets, they had to get rid of their pets. So my advice to you is not to ever tell anybody that they have to get rid of their pets. Pets are important and a part of the family, and as dear as family to a lot of people. So I would keep that in mind. Okay. And then, do you have special needs for showing times? Is there a day sleeper in the family or children who are home alone after school? Tell the seller that the lock boxes can be adjusted so that showing times can be custom set. If there's a day sleeper and they get home at 7 in the morning, they just came off of the midnight shift or the swing shift, graveyard shift, then maybe they're going to sleep from about 8 to 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and showing times are going to be from maybe 4:30 up to about 6 or 7. Have a discussion with the seller about those needs for people that are perhaps chronically ill or disabled, or children home alone, or day sleepers. Sometimes you have to take religion into account too. Some religions don't allow people to show property, show their homes from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. That's the Jewish faith. Other faiths may say that their Sabbath is on Saturday and not Sunday, so they don't do any showings on Saturday. So if there's any preferences like this, or customs, traditions, religious observances, find out what they are so that you can schedule the showings accordingly and put that information in your marketing remarks. Okay, are there any items that you are not planning to leave with the property? Personal property belongs to the seller, but some items such as spas, fountains, landscaping items, curtains, drapes, and refrigerators generally stay with the property. Please identify items you plan to take at the close of escrow. Remember, this is a checklist you're going to give to the seller before your appointment so they can think through these things and have any questions for you then at your appointment. Any EPA non-compliant wood-burning stoves or fireplaces or inserts. If a property was built before, I believe it's 1994, and they have an insert in the fireplace, one of those metal inserts, or they have a wood-burning stove, it has to be EPA compliant in order to remain on the property at the close of escrow. That's an EPA requirement. And there's going to be a little brass tag on the stove someplace, or if it's a fireplace insert, the unfortunate thing is that that brass tag is on the inside. So you just about have to pull that insert out, and when you do, it's going to destroy the pipe going up the chimney. So that's going to make that probably a dysfunctional fireplace insert at that point. If they are not EPA compliant, they have to be taken off the property. It cannot be one of those things where a buyer says, that's okay, I don't mind if it's non-compliant, I'll just take it anyway. Can't do that. EPA requirements say that the property, that the stove or insert has to be taken off the property, or it has to be made inoperable by filling it with concrete. So they've got a choice. Okay. Is the property in a county island? And the reason for wanting to know if it's in a county island, some of those properties in some of those islands, and we have a few around town. Fig Garden is one, Tarpey Village. There may be some other areas that have a little island there that is not incorporated. A lot of those properties have septic tanks and they're not connected to sewer. they're served by the sheriff's department and not by the city police department. So it's important to be able to tell a buyer about those things, and that's information we'd need to get from the seller. And has the seller consulted a CPA if the property is not their primary residence for the purposes of a 1031 exchange? We have a duty, if that property that you're going to list is not the primary residence of the seller, we have a duty to ask them if they've talked to their CPA, because if you don't mention it and they don't know that they could do a 1031 and they find out after escrow closed that they just paid a lot of taxes that they could have delayed if they had bought another property through a 1031 exchange, they can actually take the agent to court and have them held accountable for the taxes that they lost. So if you bring it up, you've done your job, and you just want to make sure that you do it with every person that is not an owner-occupied property, so that it's a habit. Okay. And then you need a list of the improvements made during the ownership of this current owner, your soon-to-be seller. We're going to need that for the TDS and the SPQ. So they need to start thinking about going all the way back to the beginning of when they own the property. And if they, let's say that they have a home warranty on their property, that's something that can be passed forward to the buyer, but you need to know about it ahead of time. Okay. And then are there HOA or CC&R documents or any monthly dues? So that's a good memory jogger to give to a seller so that they've got some idea of the things that you're going to need. Okay. So let's get into what we're going to talk to the seller about sitting at the kitchen table on that first meeting. You need to get a little bit of information, and it's some of the information almost like we talked to with the buyer. You want to ask them things like, how soon do you need to move? And remember, it's not about selling their house, it's moving. How soon do you need to move? And write this down in your notes. If they say something like, there's no hurry, it doesn't matter to us, we just will move when it sells. Then you have some other questions to ask them. Are you buying another replacement home? Are you moving out of the area? Are you downsizing? What's going on in your life then that is causing you to need or want to sell your house right now? If they say that the time doesn't matter, they don't have to move, that might be an indicator that they aren't realistic about a number of things. So that would bring some other discussion along the way. Okay, and then where are you moving to? If they're moving out of the area, you can ask if they aren't working with another agent where they're moving to, if you could set them up with an agent in that area, because we have a referral system certainly all over this country and all over the Western Hemisphere, but also in the rest of the world. We've got Century 21 offices basically all over Europe, all over Asia. We can find a Century 21 agent just about any place that they might like to move to. You can refer them, gives you a chance to interview an agent and see if you think they're going to be compatible with your client. And then when they buy something, you are in line to receive a referral commission from the top of that commission, which can be pretty nice, really. Okay. And then you want to ask a seller, if they're going to sell their house, what's more important to you when you sell your house? Is it the selling price of the house? Is it the time that it takes to sell the property? or is it just the convenience of not having to do it yourself? And that answer is going to tell you a lot about how you're going to handle the comps on this house, the price range, and handle this wholesale in general. If they say, we have to sell right away, we'd like to have our kids in the new location so they can start school in the fall, so we need to have it done by the end of summer. They've given you a specific time, and if it's July or August, that may not be a reasonable time. But if it's May and they want to be in their new place by the start of school, late August or early September, that tells you that you've got some time. If they say, doesn't matter how long it takes, we have to get the right amount of money or we can't sell. So if it turns out that they're looking for top dollar and you know that the range, you're going to come up with a range when you do your comps. You always want to have a range, and it doesn't have to be a big range, but the low end of a range is going to indicate if a property is placed at that low end of the range, you're probably going to get a quicker offer. They may not get the highest price, but they'll get the quickest sale. And if you think about the time value of money, that may be more important than what the actual dollar value would be if they can get that money in their hands faster. So if the range is low, or if the range is high, it's going to take longer to sell. So if it's one of those things where we don't care how long it takes to sell, we can't sell unless we get X number of dollars for this property, then you know it's probably going to take longer to sell. Okay. But those are the kind of things that you need to know, because that tells you how you have to handle that seller then from that point. Okay. And then you want to ask that seller about their experience in the past in buying and selling real estate. What was it like? How long have you lived here? You want to know how long they've lived in that house. How long have you lived here? And if it wasn't all that long ago, how was the experience when you purchased this house? Did you have a good experience, bad experience? And the answer that they tell you, no matter what it is going to tell you something about the way that you have to serve those people and what their needs are. If they say, we had a wonderful experience, it couldn't have been better, tell me about it. What was it about it that was good for you? Well, that agent communicated with us. She called us every week and gave us an update on what was happening in the market. And she knew always who had been in the property, and she told us that she had followed up. These are the kind of things that you know that seller is going to expect this time around, because it was good for them the last time. If that seller says, you know, it was a horrible experience, we don't ever want to repeat that, well, tell me about it. What happened that made you feel that way? Well, we had an agent that put a lockbox and a sign out, and we assume it was in the MLS, because after he got all of that stuff done, we didn't hear about him again until the end of the listing period, and he wanted to relist. And we just felt like he hadn't done a good job. He didn't communicate with us at all. We never got one phone call from that guy. So you want to be sympathetic. You never, ever want to ridicule another agent. That's against our code of ethics. But it's okay to say, I understand. I think you'll be happy with the way that I like to do my business, and I'm going to tell you about that. So you can counter those things with the way that you do business without bringing the other person into the conversation. And hopefully in your own marketing plan, you're going to have a bit about communication and how you like to communicate. You're going to find out how they like to communicate. And then you can say to them, I think you're going to be very pleased, because I call all of my buyers and all of my sellers once a week, regardless. If I have something important to tell them other than my designated time then I'm going to call or text them at that point in time too, because I want them to be current with information. But once a week, I call all of my sellers, and I usually call on Tuesday afternoons between about 2:30 and 4:30. If that's not a good time for you, I will leave a voicemail or I'll send you an email. I will somehow on that day, you're going to hear from me, and I'm going to give you a net date. Even if there's nothing for me to tell you, I'm going to call and tell you nothing happened this week. We've had a slowdown. I looked at the MLS, only 3 properties closed escrow and none of them went into pending. Whatever information you can give them to support what you're telling them from the MLS is good. They just want to know where they are in the process and are you doing your job? When you're researching and you're feeding back information to them about their sale, you're doing your job, and that's a good thing. Okay. Okay, any questions so far, anybody on anything? Okay, yes, that's for the client.
And is it like this one is for the first appointment?
Uh-huh.
We give them this one in the first appointment?
Yes, that's going to be, that page is actually in 2. For those of you at home, Noe's looking at our marketing plan book, but the very last page in the marketing plan happens to be that checklist for sellers. It's in both places. The prelude book I haven't given to you yet. I'm going to make copies and send to you because I think everybody's going to want to customize that with your own information. Is it necessary that you do a prelude book? No, but I think if you have an appointment that's going to be a day or 2 or a week away, if you can get some information in their hand ahead of time, you want to have a package ready, hand deliver that package or have it couriered over, or if there's time to put it in the mail, you can do that. But get something in their hand that's got your bio. You had asked about a copy of the listing. That's a real good time to give them a copy. Say, I'm going to give you a copy of the listing ahead of time. In the MLS, you can print one that says sample across it. And that's the one, or example. That's the one you want to give them. You don't want to give them a real listing agreement. You want it to be an example that they can read. They can read through that word example on that listing agreement, but that's going to give them information to prepare ahead of time in case they have questions or they don't understand something. And there's going to be things on that listing agreement that they won't understand just from reading it. That's where you have to be able to paraphrase it. And we're going to work on that.
So that one is the period, and this one is give it to them when you meet them the first time.
Yes. The marketing plan,
Do you like have to like explain to them?
you can do that. You can go through it a little bit and say, here's some of the things that are in there. There's a letter from both of my brokers in there talking a little bit about our company. But the important thing there is going to be the marketing plan and what goes into a marketing plan. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, about what does go into a marketing plan. So on that first trip where you're meeting the people and you're getting this information about how soon they need to move, so on and so forth, then it's probably at that point time to look at the house. When you first get there, if they say, would you like to see the house? Say yes, but I'd like to sit down and chat a little bit with you and find out about you first. Make it about them. Let me just ask you a few questions, get to know a little bit about what your needs are, what your goals are. And then I'd like to take a look and make some notes as we go through the house. One of the things you want to ask them is, what attracted you to this house when you bought it? What was the important thing here for you? Because whatever whatever created an interest in a buyer to buy any property probably is going to be appealing to the next buyer too. So ask them about that, and that could very easily help you market the property. Also, as you're walking through, ask them if they've made any capital improvements. What things have you done to this property since you've lived here? And they may say something very simple like, you know, it was in such good condition when we moved here, we haven't had to do anything. That's okay. Or they may say something like, well, we've lived here 15 years, and over those 15 years, we've painted the interior twice, the exterior once, we've put on a new roof. We put in granite, took out the tile and put granite in the bathrooms and the kitchen. We put new flooring in, and they're going to list all of those things. So those are important things for you to know and to have an idea about how long ago those were done. Okay, so those are their capital improvements. A capital improvement is anything that that they've spent money on that is more than maintenance. Okay, maintenance might be painting. It wouldn't be a capital expenditure. Taking out the tile and putting in granite is a capital expenditure. If they've added on a room, something like that, that's a capital improvement. So those are the things that you want to make notes about. And you're not doing your visual inspection at this point, but you are making some notes about some of the things that you see. The seller on this first visit is going to say to you, well, what do you think it's worth? What do you think I can sell it for? And I would say to them, what do you think it's worth? What do you think the value is? And they're going to probably have an idea. I probably wouldn't agree or disagree with them at that point. I would go back to the office, and when they press you for, well, what do you think it's worth? Say, I have an idea, but I'd rather not verbalize it right now until I can go back and do some homework and really compare what I'm seeing right now to what's in the MLS currently and what the past sales are showing. Because I want to do a good job for you and have the very best information. I want to know what I'm talking about and not just coming up with an idea right now. And let them know when you get there for that appointment, here's the way I work. I like to make 2 visits. I like to come and take a look so I can go back to the office and do a very thorough, very good job of coming up with the best comps for your house that really compare to your house. And then I will come back either this afternoon, or I can come back tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon, whatever works best for you. And if there's other people on title, we should have it at a time when everybody on title can be present. And then come back with all of your comps and that kind of thing, so that you can really present to them what you think the range for marketing is going to be, or for setting the value of the property, and know what the competition is, know what the appraisers are going to see when they appraise it in the sold properties within the last few months. So your job when you go on that first appointment shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes to half an hour. You want to create some rapport. You want to find out what's motivating the seller and what their time frame is. You want to look at the house so that you can go back and do a very good job of comping property. And then tell them that you'll come back at the appointed time with all of your homework done. And then you go back to the office and you do a very thorough job of comping the property. You pull up all of the comps that are past sales, current listings, anything that recently has gone pending in the MLS, expired or withdrawn. Expired listings tell you a lot, because they usually will tell you that the property was overpriced and didn't sell because it was priced too high. Generally, not always. but it's important to see those. We're going to be working on comps later on, and we'll show you how that actually works, how it looks in a presentation, those comps. Okay, so you do that part, you go and do your homework, and you've got your comparable market analysis or competitive market analysis, whichever you want to call it. You go back and you've got your listing agreement, and which brings up a question. Do you take your listing agreement and those things with you on the first appointment? I'm going to say you have them handy. You maybe don't bring them out unless there's an indication that this is going to be your only chance to meet with them. If you go with the expectation of telling a seller, I like to do this in 2 visits, and the seller says, you know, I have to go to San Diego, I have a job interview, I'm not going to be here for a second appointment for over 2 weeks. I was hoping we could get this listed today. Then you're going to go ahead and list it today. Even though you've only got to see it once, you're going to have to kind of operate without having as many facts as you could. So you're prepared, but if that would only be in a situation like that where you didn't have an opportunity to come back. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, like I say, most agents are going to do this in 1 visit, and I fully expect most of you will do that too. But if there's any way that you can do 2 visits, at least the first few times, so that you get used to that process of really being able to compare what you saw to what was there instead of just guessing, you're going to do a better job. You're going to feel more confident, and that seller is going to feel more confident in, first of all, your professionalism and taking the time to do that, so on and so forth. But not many people, I'm going to be very honest with you, not many people do that. Most people like to do it in 1 shot. And as you become more experienced, it's easier to do that.
What do you think about doing two appointments, but the second one being done in the office, like signing the disclosures and the listing agreement and stuff like
Yeah,
that?
that's a good point. You certainly could do that, and that would be a good way to do it, Mids.
I mean, the paperwork's more available. If we make a change, we do it on the fly.
Yes,
So, I don't know.
yeah. Actually, I like that idea. If you can get them into the office and say, and let them know that's the way you like to do your work. Just like with your buyers, you set your buyers down and you told them how you like to work. Let your sellers know too. I like to come to your home the first time and see everything I need to see so I can do the best job in comping your property. And then we'll meet at my office at a time convenient for
And
them.
if you guys run into like an issue or a problem, you know, Marsha or I will be available.
Yeah,
Mostly Marsha, but you know,
I-
we'll be here for you.
I love that idea because I'd be like, Marsha,
That's why we're here. And actually, any of our agents here will help you too. But we're here for new agents to help you get started, and because nobody was born knowing how to do this without having a little experience. So we've all been there and we all help. Happy to. Okay, so when you're with them the second time, and you're presenting your comps, here are my comps. I'm showing you the houses that have sold within the last few months and all of the information about those houses, how long it took to sell, how long it was on the market before it closed escrow, how many times they reduced the price, what was the listing price to selling price. All of that's very important information. When we do comps, we're going to talk more about this because I want you to be able to see and hold in your hand one of those comp sheets so you can actually see how important that information is. And it's just such a telling story about that property. Okay, so that's one of the things we're going to do on Thursday is work on comps and that second part of what we're going to be doing. Let's talk about some of the things that go into marketing, because when they come for the visit, or you're there for the second visit, they're going to want to know what you do to market the property. And in our book, we've got our mutual goal and our pledge to you and our action plan to market your home. We have a 3-tiered plan here that really adds a lot of information about marketing and what you do. The basics are putting out the sign, putting the lockbox on, and getting it in the MLS. That's what's expected. That's what's necessary. That's what every agent does. That's where a lot of agents stop. And in truth, that's just where our job begins, because to effectively market a property, you've got to know about that property and how to reach the potential buyer. Who's your target audience for a property? So sorting those things out, knowing who you're trying to target, who you want to get to make an offer on that property is going to tell you some of the ways that you can market, where and how you should market. I can tell you that it's been years since any real estate company has put an ad in a paper, a newspaper. Most everything is online now. If you get somebody that wants you to put an ad in a newspaper, let them know that we just don't do that. And in truth, 40 years ago, we knew that putting ads in newspapers was not effective. Was always considered a seller appeasement because sellers expected it. But in truth, we didn't get many buyers from newspapers. And so that's just stopped. We do internet marketing. That's a very important thing. We have the ability to set up a website for each of our houses, and the website address is the property address through some of the materials that we have through our company. There's going to be a number of things here on these 2 pages that you can go through, and I highly suggest that you read them so that you know what it is that we do and what you can do. Some of the things on there, you may say as an agent, I'm not going to do that. That's not my cup of tea. I would never do that. If that's the case, I would say you'd want to edit this material and take out the things that you're not going to do. This is pretty comprehensive for the things that can be done. Okay. Okay. After you've talked about the marketing, the time for getting your listing sold, you're going to know the appropriate time, whether you do that right away, whether you go through some of your marketing information first. The goal is to get the listing signed and to go over that information with the seller about what's on the listing. We're going to be going through our contracts and disclosures next week, so we'll be getting into that. I think one of the things to talk to your seller about is how to respond to a request to show the property, what their responsibility is for showing the property. And let's talk about that for a moment, because when they get a call to show the property, the best thing for that seller is to be away from home, so that those buyers can come in, look through their property, You want them to project themselves into the house and to feel at home. You want them to feel comfortable opening a cupboard door and a closet door, looking, seeing, touching. You want them to feel comfortable about saying, well, I don't like this color. Maybe we could paint it, that kind of thing. And buyers will not feel comfortable if that seller is present, and especially if that seller is going with them from room to room. Sometimes if a property is occupied and you're showing a property, that seller wants to be the tour guide. So you as the listing agent have to give some directives to that seller about what they need to do to get the best sale and the quickest sale on their property. And the best thing for them is, if at all possible, to leave the house when the property is shown. They need to, if they know that the property is going to be shown at 3 o'clock, maybe they want to be there when the people get there, introduce themselves and say, I'm just going to take the dog for a walk, take all the time you need, and I'll just make myself scarce. If it's somebody that has to be at home, then tell them when the agent comes with the prospective buyers, introduce yourself, and then try to be in a different room than they're in as they go through the house, so that they feel like they can project themselves.
Sit in the backyard.
Yes, go sit in the backyard. Take the dog for a walk. Yeah, just be invisible to those buyers while they're there. If you're an agent and you're showing a property where somebody is there, I would take control and say, is it okay if I take my buyers through? If we have any questions, we'll find you before we leave and ask the questions then, but I'd like to just take them through if that's okay with you. Because if a seller takes a buyer through, they're going to take way too long. They're going to be too strong of a tour guide, usually, that kind of thing. It's just better if the agent and the buyers go by themselves. And let the seller know that a lot of people look, they think they may be interested in a house, but maybe it turns out not to be their cup of tea. So not everybody that comes through turns out to be a potential buyer, but they're there to see. They have to see it before they can make that decision. And then let the seller know that if a buyer ever shows up at the door without an agent, they're not to let anybody in without an agent. And sometimes people will knock on the door and say, I saw your sign. We're not here with an agent, but we'd like to see your house. Can we come in? No, they cannot come in. It's one of the reasons that people list their property and list their homes with an agent is for security and safety, so that they know buyers are being screened by agents and that they're going to be accompanied by an agent. If somebody knocks on the door, tell your seller, I'm going to leave a stack of my cards and some brochures. If somebody knocks and wants to see the house, tell them they have to have an appointment, give them my card. You can give them a brochure, and they can call me and we'll make an appointment. That's a good time for both of you and we'll come back. But don't let anybody in without an agent.
I don't think we can leave brochures right now.
I'm sorry?
I don't think we're allowed to leave paperwork or brochures in the house.
Oh, okay. Hopefully that's not going to be a forever thing, so.
Just maybe with a little thing that you break down white.
The business card, no, you cannot leave that in.
Well, no, Marsha's right. Everything you can leave, you should leave. But I mean, right now, you're not supposed to leave everything.
Yeah, we're teaching for the future because I'm not planning for this coronavirus to be around 5 years from now, or even 6 months from now. So I want to teach you how to do business for after this is over, because right now everything is different. And if you learn how to do it differently, then you won't know how to do it the right way whenever the good times are back. Okay. Okay, so if there are pets in the house, talk to your seller about what needs to happen to the pets during showing. Are they going to be put in a kennel? Is there a special room? Are they going to come home and put them in the car and take them for a ride? What's the best way? If the animals are indoor animals, you want to have information in the MLS that they are not to go outside. If they're outside and they're not supposed to come in, you have to tell people what to do in the remarks in the MLS about pets. Okay. Let the seller know that if they have a kitty in a litter box, that most people are highly sensitive to litter boxes, and the cleaner they can keep it, the better for the showings. So that's just one of those things. Okay. Trying to think of some other things to tell the seller. One of the things you want to tell the seller is to prepare them for getting an offer. What's going to happen when we get an offer? And I would give the seller a copy of that listing to look at so that they've got some idea of what's coming and how to plan for it. Let them know that when we get an offer, you've got 3 choices. You can accept the offer the way that it's written. You can counter any points that you aren't comfortable with, or you can just reject it. If we reject an offer, we've closed the door on that offer. Sometimes that's the best thing to do, but generally, if there's something that's not acceptable to you as the seller, let's counter those points. We can counter the price, we can counter anything in that offer that you're not comfortable with, to give the buyer a chance to say, yes, I can live with that, let's do that. Once we get a meeting of the mind in the counter offers, then we've got an accepted offer. A lot of agents try very hard to write their offers so that there won't be a counter. They want it to be straightforward, easy for the seller, best offer the seller is going to get, and just entice that seller to sign it the way that it's written. But a lot of times buyers have their own ideas about how they want things to go or things that they want done. And so they may request things on an offer that maybe the seller can live with it. And I would prepare the seller. A lot of times buyers will ask for repairs, or they may ask for you to help pay part of their closing costs. That's not uncommon. Prepare the seller for all of those contingent factors that may come up in an offer, because the one thing we always say, it's a surprise that causes problems. So if you have never said anything about seller concessions, and that seller gets an offer and all of a sudden the buyer is asking for 3% of the sales price to be paid toward the buyer's closing costs, and that seller says, well, nobody ever paid my closing costs, why should I pay this buyer's? If you've prepared them to expect this and explain to them why some buyers ask for those things, that's going to pave the way a little bit, smooth it so that it's easier for that seller to say, oh, this must be one of those situations where if I can give a little here, we'll get a quicker sale, and so on and so forth. So prepare your buyer for anything that could be coming up in the future on an offer, if at all possible. Sometimes you get some real surprises and you just don't know what's going to be there, but help that seller to understand what's coming. Let the seller know that once there's an accepted offer, that then the escrow process starts. And during the escrow, there are things that the seller has to do. And it depends on what's in the contract. Some of the things in the contract, the purchase agreement, that seller may agree to. Maybe he's agreeing to do a roof inspection. Maybe he's agreeing to get a pest inspection. We've got 7 days, Mr. Seller, to get these things done once we have an accepted offer. So let's talk a little bit about that right now before we get an offer. It's not uncommon to get a request for a pest inspection. It's not uncommon to, for a seller to want a roof inspection and maybe a roof certification. How do you feel about that? So if you talk these things through, prepare the seller, that can be a very helpful thing. The other thing that you want to do is to prepare a seller net sheet when you're listing the property to show the seller what he can expect, more or less, not exactly, as his bottom line when the property closes. So there's a couple of ways to do this. In zip forms, in our forms, there is a seller's net sheet. We used to have to do a seller's net sheet for every property, but luckily now the title companies will do most of these for you. So you can call the title company and tell them that you need a seller's net sheet for your new listing and give them the address and so on and so forth. And they'll send you the net sheet, and it's going to show what some of the expenses are that are typical for a seller. Title insurance, the escrow fee, recording fees. If they have a loan payoff, there are fees associated with paying off that loan, reconveyance fees and some recording fees there. They all add up. They're going to prorate the taxes. They're going to prorate the interest on the seller's loan at that point. So all of those can be figured out to the date of closing and give the seller a fairly accurate figure, but not an exact figure for what their proceeds are going to be. Because the thing that's most interesting to a seller once they've made the decision to sell a property is, what's my bottom line? What am I going to get out of this? How am I going to move forward with my proceeds? So, okay. Any questions from anybody at home at this point? No? Okay. Okay, I would talk to your seller a little bit about what happens too during that escrow process, that we're going to be getting a couple of documents from escrow. One is going to be the preliminary title report. Those are going to be showing any judgments or liens, anything that's recorded against the property, and that's going to help determine their bottom line too, depending on what shows up on that prelim. Hopefully there won't be much more than just a loan. But if there are any judgments or those kinds of things, the escrow officer will factor those things into their net sheet for closing. Okay. The natural hazard disclosure is a report, and talk to them about that. It's a report that's done about the area around the house, not about the house itself. It may be something about the land on the house that the house sits on, but it's never about the house. It'll always be about the land or about what's going on in the neighborhood. As an example, is there industrial sites or industrial properties within a mile? Is there an airport within a certain distance? Is there anything else about the property? Is it in a flood zone? Are there endangered species? That kind of thing. Is it in a wildland fire area, high fire hazard area, or an earthquake fault area? Those kinds of things. So we're going to be getting that report. We're going to be passing that report on to the buyer. It's one of those things that the seller generally pays for. So on your net sheet, you're going to show some of those expenses that the seller is going to pay for, like the NHD, so on and so forth. Okay. I think it's good to have a calendar with you And in your book is a calendar for 2020. And one of the good things about this, when you're listing a house, is to have some idea of how quickly houses are selling with the features that your house offers. If your house is in tip-top condition, priced right, good area, all that kind of thing, you can probably expect it to sell within a week or 2 weeks. If you've got a 30-day closing, then you're maybe into this property for about 45 days and the seller's going to be moving. So I would point out to the seller, if our listing date is today on May, what are we, 15th? Then I think you can plan to get an offer within the first couple of weeks, and we'll have a 30-day escrow probably. I would say that your projected moving date is about the 1st of July. And maybe circle those dates on this calendar to give them an idea of how quickly they need to move. And I would say to a seller too, you know, during the buyer's due diligence time period, that buyer's going to be doing things, we're going to be doing things all leading up to the closing. If anything happens during that time period that the buyer feels like the property isn't right for them because the home inspection showed something that was unforeseen, or the pest inspection comes back and there's a lot of pest damage, and maybe they decide it's not the right house for them. I just lost my whole train of thought and where I was going with all of that. Then they can decide to back out of the property. They've got 17 days to do that. And I think it's important to let the seller know that during that 17 days, we're doing our part by doing what was requested. We've got to get the NHD and the prelim to them, all of our disclosures, which we're going to work on. And if we agree to do anything like a roof inspection or a pest inspection, we'll get that done during the first 7 days. Then that buyer's got up to 17 days. If they should back out of the purchase during those first 17 days, they get their earnest money back. There's no questions asked. It just is a contingency, and their money is protected by a contingency. After their contingency period is over, that's when we all have to get very serious about your move. And once that buyer removes their contingencies, we should all be heading toward the closing, which means, Mr. Seller, this is a good time for you to begin packing things and getting ready for the move. There is 2 things I need to tell you. One is that we have a projected closing date. It's a projected date. We're going to do our best to meet that date. But so often, right at the end of an escrow, something happens that delays a closing for a short period of time, a day or 2, sometimes even a week. Usually, when that happens, it's because there is a problem or a situation with the lender, and we have to get through lending so that they can issue the documents, the loan documents for that buyer to sign, and we can go to the closing. But until the lender does that, if there's any delay, usually that delay comes from the buyer, the lender. So we don't anticipate that, but it isn't uncommon. And I just want you to know, we can have a delay toward the end. We never know when that might happen. And it can become a very tight time because sellers have projected plans. They can't really move until they've got their closing money. So it puts everybody in a jam. But we're going to try to avoid that in any way that we can. But I do need to let you know that sometimes things just happen, and we can't do much about them except just to work with them and extend that time a bit. The other thing is that you actually need as the seller to be ready to move the day that escrow closes, so that when title changes to that new buyer and they own the property, then they have the expectation of moving in and taking possession of the property. So you have to be prepared to be ready to move. Get your moving van lined up if you're using a moving van, so on and so forth. Okay,
I think possession is like the most difficult thing to time.
it is.
Yeah, and nowadays there's so many contingencies, so
Yes,
properties that need to close concurrently, and
yes,
everybody has to be pretty timely.
yeah. There's any number of things that could happen, and no matter how hard somebody tries to avoid those delays, they just happen. And everybody's got to be a little flexible, because nobody's planning these delays. One party's as anxious as the next party to get it closed and for everybody to move on. But when it's out of their hands and in the hands of a lender or somebody else, then we all have to deal with it. So just a little advance notice that we'll work through these things the best that we can at the end, if they come up. And frequently they do. Any other advice, Miss? That,
Get your disclosure started very early in the
Yes.
transaction.
yeah,
And that way you'll get rid of any kind of issues or problems that the buyers or sellers,
yeah,
may have with the property.
yes,
And they'll be committed after getting those documents out.
yeah. That's an excellent point, and I think a very important point. We all have disclosures that we have to do on every house, a TDS, an SPQ. There's a whole bevy of forms that we have to fill out, that the seller has to fill out. And work with your seller at the time that you do the listing. Even if they aren't completed on the day that the listing is signed, arrange with that seller to pick those disclosures up within the next day or two, because so frequently with other companies, we see that the seller is never given the TDS or the SPQ or the other disclosures to work on until they get an offer. And that's way, way too late. You want the seller to complete all of his disclosures at the time of the listing, so that you've got them in your possession as the listing agent. And that way, when you get an offer and your seller accepts that offer, you can send your disclosures back to the buyer's agent with the signed purchase agreement. That's the best time to do it. Don't wait for those 7 days. Do it then.
Say that you got an offer and then you can send back with the acceptance, the disclosure.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So the sooner that the listing agent can get those disclosures in the hands of the buyers, the better. Because that buyer has 17 days total to remove their contingencies, and part of that time period is supposed to be used in looking at those disclosures. Any disclosures that are required by law that are given to a buyer after the due diligence time period of the seller for delivering those disclosures extends that buyer's time to respond, and in some instances gives them a right to rescind their offer. So it's very, very important to get those. And it's usually not the seller, it's usually the seller's agent that delays getting those disclosures where they need to be. And for goodness sakes, send them all at one time. There are agents, and I've even seen some agents at our company, they'll send a couple of disclosures here, and next week they'll send another disclosure of some kind, and they've got disclosures floating around, and they don't know what they've got going or don't have going. It's very confusing to everybody. Have all of your disclosures, send them all at one time, have them done by the seller so you can send them out, and you've done your job. You've just placed the ball in the court of the other agent. because you've completed what you need to do. Now it's up to them to get their job done. Okay,
It's the best feeling to not have to worry about paperwork.
it is, isn't it? Yeah, just get it done early and get it taken care of.
That's right. If I
Yes.
see green, everything's green, right?
Yes. Green's a great color, isn't it?
Need some money.
Yep. Okay. Trying
Hey,
to
Mark,
think. Yes, Gabriella?
can you get those disclosure statements then done like before you get an offer, or should you wait the day of the offer and have them all filled out at once?
You want your disclosures done at the time that you do the listing.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, don't wait, because if you wait till you get an offer, it's way too late.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, let's talk about what your duty is in some of those disclosures. You have a duty to do a competent agent visual inspection. California state law says that every property, 1 to 4 units that's going to be occupied by people, has to have a visual inspection done by each agent in the transaction. So a competent visual inspection means that we don't want to go above what we are qualified to do. In other words, you're not a home inspector or an electrician or a plumber or a general contractor or a city engineer. You're none of those things. We all know what it took to get a real estate license. So that's the scope of where you work, within what it took to get a real estate license. You didn't know what the difference is in electrical wires, and you don't know what's a proper foundation or what isn't, those kinds of things. So we can't judge that, but we can walk around and look at things, and we're gonna all go out on a field trip as soon as we can and learn how to do this in a real place, and it'll make more sense. But our job is to walk around and look to see what we see without diagnosing it. Meaning, if we see a stain on a ceiling, we don't know if it's a water stain. We don't know if there's a broken pipe or a leaky roof. We don't know what caused that stain. We just know that there's a discoloration on the ceiling, okay? So we don't even know if it's a water stain on the ceiling. Somebody could have popped a champagne bottle and it blew up and hit the ceiling. If you are in a bathroom and you see dark discoloration like mold or mildew, probably we aren't competent enough in our real estate education to know whether that's mold or mildew, especially if it's lying beneath the surface of a piece of vinyl and it's coming through, or maybe on a tile or something. We don't know, but what you want to say is there is discoloration in the bathroom, on the bathroom flooring, or on the bathroom tile, or on the ceiling, or wherever you see that discoloration, that's where it is. If you see cracks under windows, in tile floors, in the stucco outside, you want to note the cracks that you see, because they could indicate a structural or a soil problem, a geological problem, something like that. And the reason for noting all of those things on the agent visual inspection is to serve as a red flag to a buyer, and they're supposed to think to themselves when they see something like that, I need to have my home inspector look at that. Maybe I need to get a contractor out here to look at that, maybe an electrician to look at that electrical panel to see if it's going to meet the needs for what we have. that's only a 100 amp panel. I think we probably need 200 amp. Maybe I better have it looked at. Those kinds of things. We can't make that decision as an agent. We don't have that knowledge or that training. But it's supposed to say to a buyer, I better have somebody look at this. And sometimes you have to say to them, or maybe they will say to you, did you see that color, that ceiling discoloration up in the living room in the corner? What do you think that is? I don't know, but that's a real good thing for your home inspector to take a look at. If you make an offer on this, you can get your home inspector right away to come out so we can find out what that is. Because you don't know if it's something current, something old, something that's been repaired. Only a home inspector that can maybe get up in the attic and look around and see what's going on, or maybe he'll suggest a roof inspection. You never know, but it needs to be somebody else's decision. And then we have in our office still the ability to put our visual inspection in one of two places. Page 3 of the transfer disclosure statement has a space for writing in your comments from your visual inspection, or there is a form called an agent visual inspection disclosure sheet. It's 3 pages long, and it goes room by room. The whole first page of that 3-page deal is a disclosure to buyers and sellers about what agents do not do. We don't climb on roofs. We don't crawl underneath houses in crawl spaces. We don't diagnose things beyond our capability and our training to get a license. So it's a protection for us, and for that reason, we like to use that 3-page report. But if you've got a house that's in pretty good condition and you only noted a couple of things, and there's room on the TDS, and you've got a pretty savvy seller, or buyer, then you can put your report on the TDS and say, agent only notes 1 chip in tile and kitchen by the window, or something like that. Make your concise report without diagnosing what it is, just where it is and what it is, and the TDS is just fine. Like I say, we're going to go over all of those next week. This Wednesday, we're going to work on comps and getting ready for getting your seller to sign the listing. So I think we're about done for today, unless you have a question. Anybody?
So when you do the virtual home,
When do we do the visual home inspection? That's a good question. When you're there and you're walking around with the seller, you're not actually doing it then, but that's a good time to begin taking your notes, because you may just be poking your head into a room and looking around without actually going in and spending a moment or two in that room looking around. When you come back, if you come back for a second time, or if the seller comes to the office and meets you there, then set up a time and tell them, I need about half an hour that I can come and do my visual inspection. I'm required by state law to do that. Can I come tomorrow evening about 5? You know, give them a time or two and let them choose, but get that done as early as possible, because as soon as you get a listing, especially in today's market, there's a real good chance you're going to get an offer right away.
okay, so you do before you get accepted or that's.
Yes. Yeah, you want to do it as quickly as possible when you get the listing.
Oh, okay.
Marsha,
Yes.
this is Debbie. I have a question. If you have a listing, but you know that the listing house needs some work and it might need staging, whatever it needs, would you put it in the MLS right away, or would you wait until those things are done before you do that?
I would have the beginning date of your listing be done after those things are completed, because your first impression and the first week of your listing is the most crucial, because that's when the people are going to your serious buyers that have made offers and missed them because of competition are out there waiting for the next new house in their price range to come up, and they're out there, and as soon as something goes on the market, they're looking. You want it to be as perfect as possible the day it goes on the market. And so when you
Okay.
are at your appointment, that's a good question, because you want to have a very honest discussion with your seller and say something like, you know, I see a few things that would be tips for you to get the best buyer. Would you mind if I gave you some advice? You can't tell them what to do, but you certainly can advise them and let them know that all of these pluses that they add to their property equate to more dollar signs too. And then let them know. And as a part of your presentation, whether the house is perfect that day or an absolute disaster, let them know they're going to get the best showings and the best price for their house if it's clean and bright and shiny, picked up. They're going to be moving, put away things that don't need to be there. Anything that's seasonal needs to be packed away. They need to declutter and have everything to be in its best showing condition the first time that any buyer walks in that house. Very important. And as far as staging, if you have some staging skills or some advice for them, let them know, you know, I've done staging, I like staging. I could offer you some tips and maybe save you some money from hiring a professional stager. And then tell them what they need to do.
You know, Marsha, real quick,
Yes,
I know you guys are going to talk about disclosures next week.
this Thursday. Oh, no, next week, yes.
Okay. When you guys get to the AVID, remind me that I use the AVID strategy also.
Oh,
Because it
okay.
allows the sellers or the buyer, you know, the sellers to know what you think of their property.
Uh-huh.
And when you're making an offer or when you're receiving an offer, you can kind of give and plant different ideas into the people's minds when you're making that offer.
Oh,
You know, that's what I like to do. I like to put it in there with the offer sometimes.
okay.
So
Well, that's good. Yeah. Okay. Did that help, Debbie?
Yes, thank you very
Okay.
much.
Okay, we'll be talking about that some more too, but yes, anything that you can get done ahead of time. When we talk about the listing agreement, you're going to see that the seller can sign that listing on any given day, but you can choose the beginning day of that listing for any point in the future. And it's always good to get the listing tied up, and if they need a few days to get some minor repairs done or some cleaning done or some yard work, you can start that listing a week or two in advance or 30 days after that, to give them time to get it ready. Okay. Okay, everybody. We'll call it a day today, and then Wednesday we're going to work on comps. Will you two be in the office on Thursday or at home?
I'll be in. Gabriella will be in.
Okay, Gabriella.
And Debbie will be in too.
Oh, wonderful. Okay,
Debbie will be in.
we'll have a full house, and I'll have all of the paperwork ready for you. And Noe's here, so she'll be here on Thursday, and we'll hope to see
Dominic,
yes. Okay, ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you, Marsha.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marsha.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome. My pleasure.